Welcome to Newshour. Well, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, arrived in Washington, D.C. earlier today. He's there, of course, by invitation of US President Donald Trump, and we now know that both presidents will be joined by the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan on Friday for a series of meetings aimed at promoting peace, prosperity and enhanced economic cooperation across the region. So it is happening. The leaders and their teams are there, and someone else who is also at the White House is our very own Oubai Shahbandar. In just a few minutes, he'll be taking us through exactly what we know so far. But first, let's take a look at the current state of bilateral relations between Washington and Baku.
After a period of limited engagement during the previous US administration, the relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan appears to be entering a new phase under President Donald Trump's second term in office. During President Joe Biden's tenure, ties between Washington and Baku remained steady but relatively quiet. Strategic dialogue continued, particularly in energy and regional security, but high-level interactions were infrequent and broader cooperation did not expand significantly. That dynamic is now shifting. Since returning to office in January 2025, President Trump has signaled a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy, one that aligns more closely with Baku's long-standing priorities. Following the 2024 US election, Baku moved swiftly to re-engage with Washington. President Aliyev was among the first leaders in the region to extend congratulations, underscoring a shared vision for future cooperation. In the months that followed, Azerbaijani officials held a series of quiet but purposeful discussions with counterparts in the US administration. By mid-2025, those talks have gained traction. Energy remains a central pillar of the relationship, particularly with Azerbaijan's key role in supplying gas to Europe through the Southern Gas Corridor. US energy firms have shown renewed interest in exploring green energy partnerships in the Caspian region, including wind and solar development. Security cooperation is also expected to deepen, especially around maritime safety in the Caspian and broader regional stability. Discussions are ongoing regarding potential defense modernization and joint training initiatives. Both leaders have placed energy independence, infrastructure development, and regional connectivity at the center of their domestic and international agendas. Speaking at the Newshour Global Media Forum, President Ilham Aliyev underscored the shared values between Azerbaijan and the current US administration, highlighting in particular the importance of traditional family values. Following the event, President Donald Trump shared President Aliyev's remarks on his Truth Social platform, signaling a growing alignment in outlook between the two leaders. At the invitation of US President Donald Trump, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev arrived in Washington for a working visit, reflecting the renewed momentum in bilateral ties. The visit comes at a time when both countries are actively exploring opportunities for deeper cooperation across key areas. With shared priorities in connectivity, trade, and regional security, the evolving Trump-Aliyev dialogue signals a shift toward a more engaged and strategic partnership between Washington and Baku.
Okay, let's go now to Washington, where Oubai Shahbandar has been there working since very, very early this morning. Oubai, we often talk about you being in the heart of the action. I have to say, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better view of the White House. You've been there all morning. Let's talk about what people are saying. You've obviously been speaking to other journalists, VIPs, diplomats about this visit. We know that President Aliyev has arrived before Prime Minister Pashinyan. And what have you been hearing about the bilateral relationship between Baku and Washington, and about the relationship between the two presidents?
Shared vision and shared strategic outlook. That seems to be the message coming out of Washington here with President Aliyev's delegation in America's capital, where officials have told me they are looking to launch, not just relaunch, but launch a strategic partnership between the United States and Azerbaijan. And that is very significant given the overarching view from the Azerbaijani side that in the past 4 years in the previous Biden administration, that relations were really at their lowest point between Baku and Washington, and the shared vision and the shared values between the leaders of Azerbaijan and the United States is expected to kick launch a new chapter of bilateral relations between Baku and Washington. What we do know is that as part of that signing ceremony, that with the aim of establishing a concrete framework for peace, that Azerbaijan and the United States will also sign a strategic partnership framework that will outline an approach for cooperation in a number of fields between the two countries that will include energy and security cooperation. And so that is certainly new when it comes to the United States and Azerbaijan. In addition to President Trump overseeing yet another peace negotiation. And of course, when it comes to these talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia, countries that were once bitter enemies, it's really those last few steps towards peace that require so much effort. And that is where President Trump and his administration are hoping to provide their good offices to provide that concrete framework that would then lead the two countries into those final steps. We do also know that as part of the agreement, the United States will establish what will be called the Trump Road for International Peace and Prosperity in the Zangezur corridor that will go through Armenian territory. And that had been that issue of that strategic corridor that would connect mainland Azerbaijan through the southern tip of Armenia to that Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhchivan, which borders Turkey. That has been a key point in the ongoing negotiations, and with the U.S. establishing a private sector company that will oversee the Armenian side of that corridor, that could very well be the cap that leads to a lasting peace between Baku and Yerevan.
Yeah, big news emerging already, Oubai, and as you say, the leaders haven't even sat down yet. So very, very interesting to see what's going to happen over the next 48 hours. Talk to me about the Minsk Group, because there's been some stories emerging about this group, which obviously brings together Russia, France, and the US. That there have been some appeals that group may in fact be under threat in some sense.
And that is another big report that is coming out of Washington. We are seeing reports that the Minsk Group will be officially dissolved. This is an international group that had been for years been overseen by France, the United States, and Russia in an attempt to bring a resolution between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Over the past few decades, we've heard from leaders in Azerbaijan saying that essentially the Minsk Group didn't lead anywhere, that it was useless as an international organization because the issue of Karabakh was resolved de facto following the Karabakh War and Azerbaijan regaining its lands that had lost previously to Armenia in the 1990s. So that is also a significant point that will arise out of that White House ceremony, the official dissolution of the Minsk Group, and now it will be Washington playing that critical role as the broker to bring Azerbaijan and Armenia together after decades.
The dissolution of the Minsk Group, the strategic partnership between Azerbaijan and the United States, some form of peace deal, peace agreement. We're now starting to get a sense, aren't we, of actually what these agreements will look like in practical terms. Once we move beyond this coming weekend, what do you think President Trump's relationship with the region is going to look like going forward? I think it's going to look and feel very different.
Oh, certainly. I mean, particularly given the warm relations that we are seeing between Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev and President Trump. Look, I was there in Ankindi just a few weeks ago, where President Aliyev said directly that Azerbaijan was happy that President Trump was elected, that there were shared values with President Trump, and a deep respect for President Trump's peace legacy. We heard from President Aliyev praising President Trump for not starting any new wars during his first term. And of course, we saw President Trump posting on his social media that clip of the Azerbaijani president praising President Trump. So you can expect a leadership to leadership connectivity here that certainly did not exist previously. And this would be part of President Trump's efforts to expand the Abraham Accords, that landmark deal that he negotiated in his first term between Israel and Arabian Gulf countries. And this is a house that wants to broker and negotiate big deals and to have President Trump at the center of the world as the preeminent negotiator for peace.
Yeah, it's very interesting that obviously the South Caucasus region, Central Asia more widely, there's a lot of interesting debate, discussion about trade, the middle corridor connecting with China. What is President Trump's vision, his perspective about potential economic development, economic partnerships in this region following what seems to be a pretty comprehensive set of agreements?
Certainly, trade and economic ties will be at the center of the U.S. role in the South Caucasus. Look, this is a region that had previously been, Russia's backyard. The United States doesn't really have any major equities in this area, but that could very well begin to change given Azerbaijan's preeminent role as an energy security guarantor for Europe in the midst of Europe's largest war since the Second World War. And that includes American national security equities, given the U.S. presence in Europe, both militarily and economically, and the fact that it will be a U.S. company that will oversee the Armenian section of the Zangezur corridor. For our viewers, that corridor had been really the sticking point in the talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. That's why we haven't seen this a peace deal finalized. And so with the United States establishing the Trump Road for international peace and prosperity in the Armenia part of that corridor, that could very well be part of the U.S. and President Trump's administration using trade and business ties to push for a major and historical peace deal. And we can also expect with Azerbaijan and the United States establishing new levels of relations on a number of fronts, that American investment for the first time could enter this part of the Southern Caucasus. And of course, this would also open Armenia's western borders and routes to trade to the U.S. and to the West for the first time since its independence from the Soviet Union, once a peace deal is finalized with Azerbaijan, which would also open up Armenia's borders with Turkey and include Armenia in international trade routes and not have it completely dependent upon its southern border with Iran and its northern border with Russia. So the vision here in the White House is that trade and economic interdependence leads to peace and stability.
Very interesting, Oubai. You mentioned Russia there quite a lot. If you are sat in Moscow and you're looking at these pictures, these warm exchanges between President Aliyev and President Trump, the signing of the documents, the discussion about increasing economic opportunity, closer geopolitical ties. I mean, to be frank, you're not going to like it very much.
Look, this is a role that certainly the Kremlin wanted to see itself at the center of negotiating a deal between Armenia, where the Russian military has a major presence, and Azerbaijan. This is an area in the South Caucasus that borders Russia, and that Russia for years has had significant amount of influence in this region. That seems to have changed dramatically, particularly with the dissolution of the Minsk Group, with Azerbaijan resolving the Karabakh issue, de facto, and of course with the bilateral relations between Moscow and Baku at a very difficult point in time, as well as Armenia looking to the West and not merely being completely dependent upon Russia for its economic and energy lifeline. So certainly we can expect the Kremlin to be looking at Washington's new role as a broker and a power player in the South Caucasus with some suspicion. But of course, this also highlights the fact that these countries in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan and Armenia, establishing their own independent foreign policy and vision without the interference of the Kremlin.
Oubai Shahbandar, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that spectacular view and that great analysis. We know that you'll be keeping us up to date over the coming hours, and we look forward to hearing much more from you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of NewsHour. Whether via TV, app, social media or website, please do keep your eyes on AnewZ as this important story continues to develop. And from all of us here on the NewsHour team, thanks for being with us.